All right, everyone. Welcome back to Chiron Retrograde in Pisces the second time. Yes, we are all getting in touch with our emotions. Neptune retrograde in Pisces, Chiron retrograde in Pisces, Saturn a week back into Scorpio retrograde at 30 degrees. Yes, we really have been getting in touch with our emotions. Here's a couple of photos. Here was my meltdown Wednesday evening, right as class was getting ready to take place. And for those of you who know me and my love of gardening, I know it all grows back, but boy, it can sure trigger some emotions. And so when we didn't participate in class and rescheduled it for this afternoon, the sun was back out in a half hour, and we kind of walked around the yard just a little dazed, at least I did, and we ended up pulling weeds. I still have a mess to clean up. You're not seeing everything that dropped after by the time the storm was done. I mean, the yard's just still covered in stuff, but we went out back there right on the ridge here where you can see it, and there were some native plants that are just too invasive, and it was real wet, and it was like, okay, we'll heal this way, Leroy. So it didn't put us down too far. Here's the housekeeping slides, everyone. You can study with EAN 3 different ways: our audio podcast, the Astro Library by 3 different sections, and of course the multimedia course, which we have on sale through June 24th, I think it is. The Astro Library, a dozen years worth of materials that you can subscribe to 1 month, 6 months, 12 months, or you can do a monthly recurring that you can cancel at any time. Here's the multimedia course with its 3 segments. Of course, we sell all 3 of these segments with a binder of DVDs and another binder of support materials, as you can see on the screen. And segments 1 and 2 are now completely online. You can order either the binders and the materials, or you can order just a completely digital access to segments 1 and 2. Segments 1 and 2 also come with monthly classes that you receive and can attend live once you enroll in either one of those. And of course, all the course formats are on sale through June 24th. You can get segments 1 and 2, again, DVDs, paper, digital only, or you can combine and get it both ways. And so what we are going to look at this afternoon, which, by the way, if anybody wants to give me feedback and you like classes better in the afternoon than the evenings, you can let me know. I just kind of started them in the evenings because I thought it would be best for most working people. And when we had to reschedule all of a sudden, it was like Friday afternoon, the weekend, or we wait 2 weeks with Leroy's travels, and I was not going to do that. So thank you for those of you who can attend this afternoon, and thank you for those who listen afterwards. And again, you can give me some feedback and see if you like classes a little earlier. And so here's the dates of Chiron in Pisces. You can see where it was briefly there in early 2010, went back in February of 2011, and we've got a good 7 years of Chiron in Pisces, until it moves into Aries and starts a new cycle in 2018. About the same time Uranus goes into Taurus, 2018. But we'll look at that subject in a couple more years. I actually have some slides on Uranus Chiron here coming up. And so here is the synodic cycle between the Sun and Chiron. Of course, here's where it entered shadow, which happens before the interior conjunction to the Sun when you're looking at the outer moving planets. Here's the retrograde coming up next week, June 24th. 2133 Pisces. Here's the highlight of the retrograde cycle in mid-September, 19 Virgo-Pisces. Here's where Chiron goes stationary direct. Here's the next interior conjunction, and here's where Chiron leaves its shadow. So Chiron is a very elliptical orbit that I will show you upcoming. Well, here is how it looks visually if you watch the nighttime sky and plotted Chiron through its retrograde every single evening in the nighttime sky. By the way, for those of you who are listening live, if you haven't figured this one out yet, Friday night, Saturday night, best nights after the new moon to see that new moon sliver with Venus and Jupiter in the evening skies, and cross our fingers. Leroy and I are going to have sunshine this evening. But here's what I wanted to say. Now, Chiron's orbit is very elliptical, and it does like Pluto and Neptune do, not all the time, just when it's in Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus, the signs that it spends 3/5 of its cycle in. You can see right here, Chiron has already touched upon the point where it is going to go stationary retrograde the end of November. And here's where it entered shadow, March 3rd. In the same respect, next year, Chiron is going to have a retrograde cycle that goes over the stationary retrograde point. And here's where Chiron leaves its shadow at the end of this retrograde. Now, this is not always true. Sometimes Chiron will skip a sign when it has a retrograde cycle traveling so fast in its orbit. But right now, it's really slowed down so that it's acting almost like Neptune. Here's a little astronomy. Chiron's mean revolution around the sun and the zodiac, 51 years. It is retrograde about 5 months annually, or 43% of the time. Retrograde period 156 days. Stationary period 6 days. So it's hanging out there almost as much as Neptune and Pluto do. Chiron was discovered in 1977, and it's known as both a minor planet now and a comet, although it's actually more commonly known as a centaur. And these are the objects in space that orbit in between Saturn and Uranus orbit. Again, it has that highly eccentric orbit with its perihelion, the spot where it's nearest the sun, just outside the orbit of Saturn, and it's, I don't pronounce these words right, don't try, aphelion, where it's furthest from the sun. That will end up being sometimes just outside Uranus. Now here's a visual of it. See the sun right here in the middle. This is how elliptical Chiron's orbit is. So when it's traveling here, it's in 8 signs of the zodiac, Gemini through Capricorn, going very fast. When it's traveling out here, again, it's Aquarius, Pisces, Aries, Taurus. 3/5 of its orbit is in 4 signs of the zodiac, as you can see right here. And because of this elliptical orbit, sometimes it'll only have a typical opposition. For instance, here with Neptune back in 89-90, they had 3 oppositions. But depending on how it's traveling in its 51-year orbit, it can have a gazillion aspects to other planets. Many of us are quite familiar with Chiron opposing Uranus 41 times. Right here you see this. We have the same thing going on. I'll show you this later on with Chiron waning semi-sextile Uranus. I want to say it's 33 times that it's doing this, but you can see that it really makes some outrageous repetitions to certain aspects. And I would say that for those who want to study Chiron on a very personal or close level, it's just going to represent different rhythms on planet Earth where we really need extra opportunity to become aware of those chironic wounds and the needed opportunity to heal those wounds. Mythology of Chiron. The centaurs were mythological creatures back in the Grecian Roman days. They had the head, arms, torso of a human, as you can see behind you on the screen, body and legs of a horse. Now, Chiron was the kindest of all the centaurs. He was intelligent, civilized. Most of the centaurs were pretty hedonistic. Drugs, alcohol, sex, you name it. They were probably the first of the really wild ones in mythology. But Chiron, he stood alone against the rest of the centaurs. He was known as the healer, was known as an astrologer, an oracleist, highly revered as a teacher and tutor to young men. He was known for his knowledge and skill with medicine. Chiron still works with the health and healing. That's why some astrologers feel that Chiron has rulership of Virgo in the 6th house over Mercury. And in his story and mythology, he was immortal, but he was wounded with an arrow, a poison arrow, and he could not die. He could not heal his wounds. And so Hercules arranged a bargain with Zeus to exchange Chiron's immortality for the life of Prometheus. Chiron was allowed to die. And so this is where the astrology comes through with a lot of the Chiron archetypes in regards to the wounded healer. It's the key words for Chiron. And part of what we need to do in order to be able to heal is to let go of the wound, up to and including the extremes of death. Now, letting go of the wound can be like letting go of our story. How many of us in the mind-body movement are quite familiar with our wounded stories, and how many times do you find yourself sharing that story in healing circles, in conversations? And there are those that say, when are you going to stop telling the story? When can you let it go? And when it comes up in consciousness, in your mind, can you release it? Can you just let the story go by the wayside? And so Chiron is known as the archetype that brings those wounds into consciousness in order to heal them. But again, a distortion with Chiron is becoming connected to the story of our wounds. Chiron rules all the healing arts. You point out that since its discovery in 1977, look at how the New Age metaphysical movement seemed to have a surge in consciousness and popularity again. Its word comes from, I don't know how to pronounce this one either, Kyros, Greek for the word hand. And that's why Chiron also rules anything that does with healing touch. I forgot to put massage in here. That's also one of the healing arts that Chiron rules. And so Chiron energy is known as sacred energy that we can move. And so many times you will find that those who are literally hands-on healers, they have a pretty active Chiron in their chart, aspecting other planets. Now, Barbara Ann Clow, who had the one of the first books on Chiron after it was discovered, she called Chiron the Rainbow Bridge because its orbit lies between Saturn, the individuated consciousness, and Uranus, the individuated unconsciousness. So Chiron can go between those two realms. It can be conscious like Saturn, and it can go into the depths of the unconscious like Uranus does. And so it actually creates almost a triune. You know, in EA, we look at Saturn-Uranus as a very distinct planetary pair between all the inner planets up to Saturn, again, what's conscious, And then Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, what's unconscious. So Chiron makes a quite natural triune with Saturn and Uranus. And if you wanted to study your own chart, you could look at Chiron's phasal relationship and or aspects with both of these planets. Now, most of us typically listening to this call could easily be in that age group where we have the Chiron-Uranus oppositions. And those oppositions are really where Chiron is trying to pull what's unconscious out of Uranus. It's the opposition, it's the polarities, it's the objectivity, it's shining that light of day, so to speak, on the opposite side of the chart. It's pointing at, when it's in opposition to Uranus, it's pointing at the area that our natal Uranus needs to access in order to find objectivity, balance, and healing with all that is represented as unconscious trauma and therefore wounding in Uranus. So isn't it interesting that we've had so many Chiron-Uranus oppositions from the 1950s through the 1980s, and we're all having this opportunity to be made aware of this. Barbara Hanclough also felt that Chiron, again, ruled Virgo in the 6th house. Sometimes with Chiron, she says there's a struggle to stay in the body, to get in our body, to raise our consciousness. When we get to the distortions of Chiron, again, we can feel very disempowered. It's too hard to be here on planet Earth. My wounds hurt too much. There's too much pain. I can't do what I need to do to heal myself. I'd rather just check out. And she got that from the fact that the opposite of Virgo's 6th house is Pisces in the 12th house. So Chiron, and of course Neptune, Pisces, 12th house, very associated with shamanism, ancient wisdom. Again, the healer and teacher that wants to come through. And so generically, whenever we go through a Chiron retrograde, each of us are going to be trying to throw off the natal wounds of Chiron by sign, house, aspect, and wherever transiting Chiron is by sign and house, we're going to be throwing off wounding in that area. And as retrograde, we throw off or work to heal the wounds or let go of that old story. What we open up space for is our own healing and the healer within us to come forth. And there isn't anywhere on planet Earth that isn't in need of healing in every area of life due to the patriarchal distortions that have been on planet Earth for several thousand years. Now, when we look at Chiron in Pisces, there is a lot about Monday night's class on Neptune in Pisces and Neptune retrograde in Pisces. You could take the entire Neptune retrograde class in Pisces and insert it into this class, because Chiron is touching in on Pisces. So it's touching in on that archetype. And what have we learned about the archetype of Pisces? It's the last of the 12 archetypes, so it includes all 11 archetypes or signs, houses that came before. So there's so much energy in Pisces that just the Pisces energy can be sometimes hard to hold in consciousness or understand in consciousness. We check out, we space out, we go for the substitutes, we go for the substances that can allow us to just find some relief from really holding all this energy. You have to find balance with Pisces energy in order to hold it. And so any planet that goes retrograde in Pisces, pointing to that Virgo polarity, which is still going to be of the element of earth, regardless of where you think your rulerships are. I'm not one who really says that I subscribe to the rulership of Chiron in Virgo. I'm not saying I don't. I'm still with Mercury, but I'm open to entertaining this possibility and see how I feel about it over time. So we have to sometimes then take all that Piscean energy and be able to balance it on the physical plane. Because the archetype of Pisces is transcendence, wanting to know the big questions. Why am I here? Where did I come from? Wanting to have that spiritualization and reconnection to source energy. There's got to be more than hailstorms ruining plants. Whatever your story is, there's got to be something more than just this physical existence. And so Chiron is looking for that in regards to, why do I hurt? Why do I have pain? Why do I have these wounds in my world? And so Chiron in Pisces is all about healing the wounds from deeper understandings of universal source, natural spiritual laws and principles, which are understood on the ultimate level when we can encompass Neptune Pisces 12th house archetype. Now, of course, the distortions when we have Chiron in Pisces is to re-imprint the wounds, to re-imprint all the wounding. I mean, for me, Wednesday, I have a lot of Scorpio in my chart. I have a lot of water in my chart. When I get triggered, the emotions fly. And sometimes it's anger. Sometimes it is a sense of victimization and powerlessness, that Piscean energy that comes there. I have natally Sun, Mercury, Neptune, 1 to 2 Pisces. So I have this Pisces archetype in consciousness, whether I want it or not. And when I go through one of those triggers, like I did Wednesday with the storm, there's shock, and then there's that emotional sense of powerlessness. And then there is this part of myself that goes, okay, how are you going to look at this from a larger picture? Are you going to succumb to being a victim on planet Earth one more time? Are you going to really look at this and go, this is just a healing opportunity. This is a lesson on planet Earth. This is just here to teach me something. Mother Nature will come back around again, whether there's never another human being on planet Earth again. So, after the shock, I just said, okay, how do I tap in, Source? How do I tap in? And so I went outside, Leroy went outside, we found another way to just physically release, I guess I'd say. That's how I emotionally release, is physically release. And, so when we go through those traumatic moments, this is little Uranus here, there's such important choice points when we experience trauma. Do we succumb to it? Or do we use it to really go, okay, what's the larger picture here? Then how do I step back into my body and live through it? Sometimes when it's death by an accident, we don't get to really step back into the body. It can become very important on the other side. And that's why, we had my sister lost her father-in-law, and when she called me, he lost it to an ATV accident last week on his ranch. And when she called me, I says, talk to him, talk to your father-in-law, because he's either very confused what happened, he didn't know what happened, or as the ATV with its tank of probably, I'm going to, chemicals to kill weeds or whatever, or a water tank, rolled on him, he could recognize what was happening, and he could be angry at the accident. He could be, hey, I'm free. He always said he wanted to go this way. The family, the wife and the 2 kids were not upset around it. But, it's always so important then, if the wound is actually literally physically death, that you talk to them. Don't talk to them as though they're gone. Don't talk to them as a third party. And I preach this with my family, but I think my family's getting the hang of it. And so that energy that's so important immediately after the trauma of a wound, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, it's so important that we recognize choice points and make the conscious choice to heal it as best as we can. And of course, the other distortion with Chiron in Pisces, just like Neptune in Pisces or any planet in Pisces, is substance abuses. Checking out with alcohol and drugs or food or, just escaping through television. Something along those lines. You probably, we know many of these Pisces archetypes. And Chiron in Pisces, just like any other planet in Pisces, is going to cycle between confusion and clarity around our wounds. And these cycles are unpredictable in both the timing and the duration. When we're in the confusion cycle, we feel we cannot heal. We are the victim. So the Piscean distortion words, alienation, disassociation, disillusionment, meaninglessness, going into being catatonic, in its extremes, the ultimate in depression. Just feeling that we can't get a handle on anything. And so there is a need to dissolve our attachment to the wounded story. And so we will be led through these types of situations if we are too attached to the story. Because again, the whole purpose of the confusion side of the cycle with the Pisces archetype is to let go. Let God Goddess. Let the past go. Let the wounded story go. And as Chiron is getting ready here, it's slowing down. Still stationary, standing still in the sky, 6 days. So we are almost there. We're close enough. That stationary retrograde is an opportune time to let go, throw it off. You've got the energy of the retrograde to do it. Now, the other side of the cycle is the clarity cycle. And this is where we actually have that surrendering process. And I will, my will, divine will. We search for source. We search for that deeper meaning. And we also have source energy itself, God, Goddess, come through on its own timing. And so it brings then the ahas, the renewals, the inspiration, the faith that we made it through, the bliss, the devotion, the miraculous healings, the ability to feel connected in compassion to everybody else on planet Earth. So Chiron will go through these cycles too, and these cycles will ebb and flow when it's direct, and they will ebb and flow when Chiron is retrograde. Generically, Chiron stationary retrograde can be a confusion cycle that we need to throw something off. Generically, Chiron stationary direct can be the aha moments and the clarity cycle returning. But this is not a guarantee, and it will have a lot to do with how each of us personally are surrendering to source energy. I will, my will, divine will. Now, one of the other things that we need to cover just quickly with Chiron in Pisces is the whole distortions around sadomasochism. Many of you might be familiar with the fact that this stems directly from the human-made religions conditioning us to believe in a perfect God with, of course, our imperfections as humans. And what this has created from our imperfection is a sense of guilt. When the guilt's linked to atonement, we have victimization, masochism. I must suffer, I must work really hard. If I don't feel worthy, I can self-sabotage. When the guilt's linked to anger, we have the victor and the sadist going out to hurt someone else before he is or she is hurt. And so as Chiron moves through Pisces, and it has a long cycle every time it's in Pisces, it is there for about 7 years versus very short cycles in the other signs. This is where we can make sadomasochism conscious. Chiron in Pisces, direct and retrograde, is giving us an opportunity to recognize these distortions that are going on around us. Barbara Ann Clow said that Chiron in Pisces could represent a crisis, that Virgo word, over being able to connect with universal source. And so when Chiron goes retrograde and points to Virgo from Pisces, this is that opportunity to heal this stuff and to just really, I mean, this is my languaging. The relationship we have with ourselves is identical to the relationship we have with God Goddess. It's an inside job. It's nothing more than simple conversations in our head. And the crisis comes up to bring about those conversations internally and then reflecting them outward. And Barbara also said that Chiron in Pisces was an opportunity to make that astral plane conscious. Think about it. Neptune in Pisces going retrograde in its own sign, we can really have the veil thinned with the astral plane, with the Akashic records, with all the deep stuff on an unconscious level brought to the surface. And so Chiron in Pisces can be part of the bridge traveling right now with Neptune of learning how to do the same thing. It's helping Neptune. They've been in tandem here for most of the last decade in Aquarius. They had one conjunction in late Aquarius, Chiron Pisces. I think it was 27, 28 degrees Aquarius in February of 2010. And so they've been traveling in tandem here for about 20 years. Do you think it's possible that there are those of us starting to recognize that, you know, how much longer are we going to keep hurting each other? I mean, for those of you who haven't heard of it, there was a massacre at a church in North Carolina this week. And, you know, a young white boy went in and shot 9 people in a historically black church, although it was a pretty diversified church at this point. And there's pictures circulating the internet about how the police were handling this guy when they caught him versus a black man for stealing cigarettes in New York. I thought, you know, there's a lot of kind of wake up going on with different policing issues, Pluto Capricorn retrograde, racial issues. You know, the racial issues ultimately come down to Neptune and pigmentation, which is, if I'm remembering right, melatonin will determine how light or dark the skin is, and melatonin is ruled by Pisces. So isn't it interesting, Neptune Pisces, Chiron Pisces, that we have these racial issues that just seem to have been in the news here recently. So can we make conscious the fact that on a collective level, regardless of race, we're one species, humans. Can we realize on a conscious level the connectedness with other species? I got a couple things to say on Pope Francis here. So just briefly, I put this in every retrograde one. Why planetary retrogrades? It's a geocentric phenomena. Again, I showed you the photo earlier that from planet Earth, the planets appear to slow down, go backwards, slow down, go direct again. Planetary retrogrades are more powerful because that's when the retrograde planet is always closest to Earth. It basically causes a withdrawal from the status quo of that archetype in order to redefine it according to what is natural for each of us as individuals. We step outside the status quo. We're not buying into it. Retrograde planets are always non-static, in a state of always evolving. The sign and house defines the manifestation of the retrograde planet. The opposite sign and house is where we look for clarity and expression. And of course, the answers to retrogrades always come from within ourselves. And this one you might be familiar with. When a natal planet's retrograde, it's an individual lesson throughout our lifetime. When a planet is retrograde by transit, we are individually and collectively learning the planetary lessons. If you have a natal planet retrograde and it goes retrograde by transit, there's temporary harmony and balance. So, for instance, any of you who were born with Chiron retrograde, you have an emphasis in this lifetime to throw off your wounding, to be objective about it, and to take those wounds, heal them, and turn the wound into the gift. If you're born with Chiron close to being stationary retrograde by a week or two, that means the review is necessary. You have no choice. It's hard to move things forward in regards to your wounds and traumas until you do start to heal and throw them off. If you, for instance, are born with Chiron close to being stationary direct, that means you've had some recent past lives working on healing the wounds, and you're ready to let go and move forward. And you've got the support of the universe to help you do it. These slides also very similar to the Neptune. Chiron retrograde in Pisces points to Virgo. And it means that we can experience reality shocks and those famous crises. And we can have multiple crises because the purpose of crises is to become conscious enough to change the physical environment, to change the physical patterns, change the emotional, mental, spiritual patterns. And of course, that word criticism comes from crises. And we can find ourselves experiencing inner-outer criticism if we are not making the effort to change, to heal the wounding. And so, Chiron retrograde in Pisces, you could become a lot more acutely aware of how your own inner self-talk could be self-critical. You could become aware of where you are critical with others, where you get triggered, and make the efforts to change that. Now, of course, because it points to Virgo, if we go into the distortions, we can go into the avoidance activities again. Virgo can do all that excuse making. Not ready, I don't have the time. Virgo will keep going round and round and round and round and round rather than moving forward with things. So here again, for instance, with Chiron, this is where we get very attached to our story. Every so often I will, use the story, or somebody says, well, how did you find astrology? Now I have a tendency to just say, well, I found it over a crisis. But there were several years there, and I do mention it once in a while. Well, my ex left me for my best friend. The Leo dramatic effect, it really creates a response, and I'm very careful to go, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I did find astrology. I hope he's as happy as I am. So I really made an effort, for example, to change the story of something that at the point when it happened, I thought I was going to die. It did take a few years to get through that one. And so, really being able to be aware of, again, that Virgo self-talk and how we want to change it. Any planet retrograde in Virgo is going to point to the deeper Piscean lessons. Any planet retrograde in Pisces is going to point to the practical Virgonian effort we need to make. And that is the path to perfection, the Virgonian effort again and again and again. So we can also have, again, a re-imprinting of sadomasochism. That's what happened with this massacre in North Carolina, but perhaps it's going to serve as a focal point, or maybe another wake-up point again for masses to start making changes in those areas. Now, some of those Virgonian efforts, diet, exercise, and rest, that Piscean checkout has to come down to planet Earth. Chiron in Pisces, sometimes we don't want to be in our bodies. And so it becomes important to do those physical routines, to do those daily efforts, especially when we're going through any confusion cycle. Why does this always happen to me? Why do my lovers always leave me? Why do I always get fired from my jobs? Why can't I ever get a job? Whatever the story is, it's important that when we're in those confusion cycles, one foot in front of another, okay, what are the small, simple things that I can do here on planet Earth taking care of myself? And included in this, with the Virgo archetype, is forgiveness. Forgiveness of ourselves and others. This is the way to release the criticism. No one's perfect on planet Earth. Planet Earth is where we come to perfect. And here also, discernment versus judgment. The self-improvement efforts to perfect. The lesson is in the effort, not the results. And I always say SMEP. The lesson is in the effort, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, and physical, all 4 levels. And one that also can become very succinct for us with Chiron retrograde in Pisces, pointing to Virgo. Where do we help others? In addition to helping ourselves, where do we help others? Where do we help one-on-one? Where do we help the group? Where do we help anyone outside of ourselves? Humans, animals, plants. I also talk to my plants. I talk to my plant spirits, and I go, I know you guys are a little shocked right now, but you're healthy. You got some good foundations and good roots. Mama grows perennials. So you guys can come back better yet. To know, in fact, from hailstorms, the plant is still trying to grow. The roots send up new shoots all over again. So finding those ways in where we can be of service and helpful to others, sometimes even through our own cycles of confusion. And of course, this then is devotion, and its distortions are sacrificing ourselves past the healthy boundaries to another. So, you can probably, as I've been talking here, recognize that as Chiron turns retrograde, just like Neptune retrograde in Pisces, it can make us quite aware of, the different things that are going on. And I just feel that we really have climate change coming through more and more and more, at least here in the US. I mean, who hasn't been experiencing extremes of weather from one way to another? The California droughts to the flooding in Texas and Oklahoma. We've had flood events that have been pretty strong for our area. Leroy's family has a big catamaran pontoon boat that we take up to the lake every year, and there is more water coming into the lake than going out, and all of the docks are flooded. Nobody can put any boats in. The beaches are all flooded. It's ridiculous. I've never seen that much water in that lake. And we had a flood. We back in 1972, the dam, 10, 15 miles above the city in the mountains. Well, they had an extreme flood event, and they had to replace the dam to the lake, and then a dam down below here in a small little lake in town broke, and so we had a major event with loss of life. So Rapid City and the Black Hills have made a lot of changes, but these dams have been built for like 500-year events now, and they're like, whoa, this is what Leroy and I are going to do tomorrow. We're going to go look at the water, honey. So you can see also that we can have religious fanaticism. We can have the racial fanaticism, again, like North Carolina, as the planets stationary, direct, and retrograde. We can see an intensity of this stuff. Look at all the refugees on planet Earth that are just lost. Health and wellness could come up. We can see more and more things in the news. We can see the distortions in the wounds. We can also see breakthroughs in, the world of drugs, breakthroughs in the world of natural healing becoming more accepted. And, for me, one of the things about the whole archetype of Pisces is when we're not grounded, when we're not in our truth, we're in the distortions and lies. And we have a lot of that going on in the corporate world, a lot of that going on in political cycles in with our U.S. Presidential election cycle coming up here. And for those of you who have not listened to the Neptune retrograde in Pisces one, listen to that one because I spoke on the whole money thing there. I won't repeat it here. Now, one more thing I want to say, just some general stuff on that, but Chiron transits in general, Barbara Handclau's words is that Chiron brings an alchemizing process to the evolutionary process of a planetary archetype. And so I kind of extrapolated that as I was thinking about it, and I went, oh, so transiting Chiron, progressed Chiron, solar arch, oops, there's a misspelling, solar arc Chiron, anytime one of those three forecasting methods of Chiron touch upon a natal planet, conjunctions, squares, oppositions, trines, it's either going to be an ease or a force, stressful, non-stressful planets. Chiron will then be working to really have a, to me, alchemizing is metamorphosing. It's almost like a Platonian word. It really brings that ability to be conscious and change and evolve and shift. And I thought on that and I'm like, okay, so who says that the other planetary archetypes by transit, progression, solar arc, if they make aspects to natal Chiron, There could be a reciprocal waking up that's going on. So you can ponder on this one with your own charts and work with this and see if you notice, and you could play with dates and look at the Chiron aspects. You can just look at Chiron transits, but I work with progressed and solar arc Chiron. And so you can see with your, play with it with your own chart and see if it works both ways for you. So when I thought about this, and then the news, I've been aware of Pope Francis producing one of his new encyclicals, I think they're called. And so I've been kind of waiting for it, and it came out yesterday. And would you believe, this is when it was posted yesterday by the Catholic News Agency. And so I thought, I wonder if Chiron is active in Pope Francis' chart. This is the name of his encyclical about climate change. Don't ask me how to pronounce this in Latin, but it means praise be to you. The other thing that I thought that was interesting about Pope Francis, even though I think that he's really kind of slow on the whole thing with females, he chose a nun to do readings from this new encyclical as well. And he also, Saint Francis, the saint, the patron saint of animals and nature and the environment, back in his day, he referred to planet Earth as a female, as a mother. And Pope Francis has adopted Saint Francis language on that. So you can see what I pointed out here in the chart. Here is Pope Francis' natal chart in the inner circle right here. Here's transiting Pluto in the 7th house, speaking to the masses. But look at South Node, North Node, 2416 Gemini. Here's transiting Chiron, getting ready to go retrograde within orb. And here it's come out, and there are those that are just loving what he's saying. And of course, there is talk that a copy of this encyclical was leaked ahead of time because they wanted to undermine the emphasis of what he was about to say. So you're noticing Republican politicians criticizing it, corporations, you're noticing the status quo and the consensus criticizing it, and then you're noticing the scientists praising him. You're noticing different religious spiritual groups praising him. Here's a tidbit I did not know about the Catholic Church until I started looking this up with St. Francis in the last few weeks. The Catholic Church is not anti-evolution. A lot of your evangelical churches, believe in Earth is only 4,000 years old. The Catholic Church did not go to that extreme, and the Catholic Church says that the Earth is a lot older than it is, and that still can support a supreme being creating it. And I thought, well, that's really interesting to know that detail from the Catholic Church. And so here is someone like Pope Francis coming along. And basically, if you don't know this new encyclical, it's all on climate change. And he's calling human beings out on being filthy and being very disrespectful to planet Earth. And we need to consume less. And we need to take care of cleaning up the environment. We need to pay attention to climate change and change our polluting ways. And we need to take care of the poor, because the ones that are hurt the most by climate change are the poorest among the poor. So I thought, what a nice example for Chiron. Now Chiron goes stationary direct at 1656 Pisces, the end of November. So let's see if this cycles back around in the media some way when Chiron goes stationary direct on his Saturn. And as you can see right here, Pope Francis is going to have 3 waning Chiron squares. Again, natal Chiron, counterclockwise around the chart to transiting Chiron, we're reaching the 270-degree mark, more or less. So here is a last quarter square transiting Chiron to natal Chiron. Here's Chiron in that south node in Gemini. Look at what a voice he has been. And of course, you see these two right here from their recent conjunction squatting on this south node. And so, I mean, here is a Chironic voice of wisdom, of speaking up for the masses. And Pope Francis has a reputation. He doesn't care if what he says is controversial. He speaks to truth as best as he knows it. Again, I don't agree with him on 100% of things, especially where women are concerned, but I sure like him on the environment. So you guys may be seeing a few other things too that's going on in the chart, but I just for the moment wanted to emphasize or show an example on how Chiron can really be a voice and a force and a consciousness for healing in general, and specifically as it is going through Pisces. Oh, I'm just seeing this too. Look at here. Natal Neptune is involved. He actually has Saturn square the nodes, and he has Neptune square the nodes. This is not the first lifetime this gentleman was in a religious order. And he is probably trying to, in some ways, his soul may be trying to make amends for things from the past. Probably, I'm going to, I'm looking at the gender issue. I'm looking at the possibility that either he's been wounded as a woman or he's been wounding of women. Let's say that, let's watch Pope Francis here over a number of years and see how his stances change in regards to gender issues and female issues and women in the church and the whole celibacy issue. Which, by the way, if you didn't know this, the other thing that St. Francis said today, he is open to changing the date of Easter to be a specific date in the calendar every year. So I can't remember what it was, specific date so that everybody can worship Easter at the same time. Or something. I didn't have time to read it all. If you don't know this, Easter is the only date that moves in the religious calendar year after year. And it's the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. Now you tell me that's not astronomical, astrological based. Okay, so moving on here, looking at my time. I'm going to take a drink. Okay, I think I'm okay. You know, I like to put this stuff in. What's all the planetary aspects to every planet? All right. Is that you, Leroy, coming on, or is that me? Can you hear me okay? I was just told that my audio connection was lost. Can you repeat back to me? Tell me you can hear me.
No, you're fine, Kim. You have been kind of clicking in and out. I've been monitoring that, but it's fine for now. We're not going to change anything at this
Okay.
point.
All right. All right. Thank you. I appreciate that. So here's Sun Chiron. Of course, this is probably the most important planetary pair with a retrograde cycle, because the highlight of it is always the Sun opposition to Chiron. You can see where the dates are. You can see where this is going to be in your chart. We're going to be repeating themes here. The Virgo Sun, shining the light of day on our evolving abilities to self-heal. And of course, for me, it's SMEP. It's all 4 levels. So learning how to make peace with our wound or disease, being able to love the wound, acknowledge the wound, forgive the wound. And I love that Ho'oponopono forgiveness prayer. Ho'oponopono. 1, I love you. 2, I'm sorry for XYZ. 3, please forgive me. 4, I forgive you. And the second point, I'm sorry for XYZ, comes from the fact that if it's in our world, we have consciously or unconsciously co-created it. And so all of the reds are the aspects that are going to happen when Chiron is retrograde. Mercury's a little active with Chiron this time around. As you can see, right here, I included next year's in there. Right here you can see, remember Mercury off of this most recent retrograde in Gemini had 3 waxing squares to Neptune, okay? Mercury has 1 waxing square to Chiron. But then it comes in and it does the trines just like the sun. And of course, here's Mercury opposing Chiron as well. Next year, Mercury will have 3 aspects with the Chiron retrograde. But what Mercury is going to bring to this picture is the Virgo discrimination and discernment. Again, Mercury's going to be setting out at the Chiron polarity point, going, okay, feet on the ground, little practical energy here. How are you going to walk on planet Earth? How are you going to go about the mercurial process of moment to moment, day to day, working with your own healing? So Mercury's going to help us recognize potential new self-healing abilities, new hands-on healing abilities. Mercury, with its rulership of Gemini, rules the hands in health and wellness astrology. So Mercury Chiron, if you've got Mercury Chiron aspects in your chart, quite possible you could be very good with your hands in some way. Venus Chiron, as you can see here, most of these, the inner planets, they go from conjunction to conjunction, so you can see an entire cycle if you want to work with your own chart on it. What we're having going on most of the time, especially with Venus and Mercury, the inner planets, they're always going to be right where they're with the sun, making an opposition to an outer planet. Venus, this is going to be working on lessons in regard to worthiness in love. Venus and Virgo, self-criticism or self-love. So we're going to be learning to love ourselves, new levels, new awarenesses of how we're going to do that. And we can be working with expanding our ability to be compassionate and loving with others in our world. Mars is a little active with Chiron as well this year. You can see that during the Chiron retrograde cycle here, Mars is moving from a waxing trine to the gibbous phase sesquisquadrate to the inconjunct to the opposition. So Mars is going to have some energy here in taking actions on how we want to heal. Mars can be running with Chiron or an outer planet, or it can be running with the sun in the inner planets, and it alternates back and forth year by year with its 2-year cycle. So this year Mars is running with the inner planets, even though it travels a little slower than them. So how are you wanting to self-heal? How are you being sparked to be a healer? whether it is something that you're going to want to do for a living, or whether it's just something that you want to do on planet Earth, such as compassionate healing acts. And of course, this can be triggering a lot of us to become more interested, open in alternative healing as an option for whatever we want to do in the whole health and wellness movement. I think all the way through Chiron in Pisces, the health and wellness movement on an alternative level is coming to the forefront again. Jupiter is a little active too. I left in these, here was its last conjunction, got down to the next one, but I left in these waxing inconjuncts. Remember, Jupiter's been making, it's been the apex of a yod with Chiron and Pluto. We had it in September, we had it in February. Here's the third and final Jupiter waxing inconjunct to Chiron. It's coming along next week, right as Chiron's turn stationary retrograde. So this really has us intuiting how we want to go about being able to heal ourselves and help heal others. Now, I put this in because Jupiter is going to make the first opposition to Chiron before Chiron goes direct. You can see right here, very close to that 17-degree mark. And then it's going to have two more oppositions with Chiron. Jupiter's only having one opposition to Neptune later this year in October, but it has three oppositions to Chiron coming up here at the end. And as we move into these oppositions, I think both of these aspects, the quincunx or inconjunct and the opposition, choice points in awareness. Are we victim of our world? Or are we a co-creator in our world? And so there's potential here to really bring about some evolution of all our intuitive healing abilities with these two planets. Saturn, whoops, I'm sorry, I thought my thing was going to go. With Saturn doesn't have any direct aspects, but I would just like to point out the fact that next year's retrograde cycle, we'll go into this in more detail next year, 3 last quarter squares to Chiron as it is finishing up its retrograde cycle in Pisces. And so because it's a last quarter square, these are going to be that crises in consciousness to self-heal, letting go of the physical woundings and traumas. And for those of you born between 1986 and 2006, you could easily have a Saturn-Chiron opposition in your chart, because there were 27 oppositions during that time period in various signs as it was going along. And so just kind of be on a heads up for this then, that Saturn is in disseminating phase to Chiron right now and moving towards the last quarter phase. So what is it about that old story? What is it about the old wounds that we are, disseminating phase where Saturn Chiron is right now? We've learned as much as we can about the story. There isn't anything else to know about it. And Saturn's working to make it as conscious as possible. And so as we get to the last quarter phase, and then Saturn comes along to finish up last quarter and balsamic phases between 2017 and 2028, this can really be a time period here to affect some healing on conscious levels, to really do some letting go of old stuff that we just don't want anymore. old traumas that we don't want anymore. Now, Chiron to Uranus. Here's the two conjunctions. Very erratic cycle. I couldn't make sense of how many years the cycle was. It shifted and shifted. This is something I got to research a little more with even Jupiter and Saturn to Chiron, although that's going to be a little more steady. Last conjunction, 1898 for Sag. Doesn't have another conjunction until the 2040s. But here's that time period again. 1952 to 1989, where Chiron opposed Uranus 41 times. So look at this again as a planetary pair backing up. Saturn Chiron oppositions 27 times, 8606. Chiron Uranus oppositions 41 times, 52 to 89. So from the 1950s through 2006, Chiron has been opposing either Saturn or Uranus. And that, remember that triune, that rainbow bridge that Barbara Hanclough talked about, you know, making the unconscious conscious? I just feel that there's so many of us who were born with this. We have such opportunities in this lifetime with this opposition to become conscious, to become aware, to shake it off. Oppositions. Awakening the healer within. Now, the distortion, of course, we could fall into hurting each other versus healing one another. This is the choice point that's going on right here. And Chiron Uranus as a pair is going to directly relate to our abilities to self-heal unconscious traumas and wounds. The opposition is making them conscious in order to heal. It's a lifetime intent for those of us born during this time period. Now, here's the other little tidbit for Chiron Uranus. This year, there are two waning semi-sextiles, Chiron, Pisces, and Uranus in Aries. The second one this year, right before Chiron turns direct on the 28th, this is where they're both at on those dates. Chiron is stationary, direct, standing still. However, between 2009 to 2021, Chiron makes 33 waning semi-sextiles to Uranus. Waning semi-sextile, that's the 330-degree mark on the circle. This is balsamic phase. This is the quickening of surrendering to source energy. Here's the dates, as you can see, in which it's Aquarius to Pisces. This is Chiron to Uranus. Pisces to Aries, Aries to Taurus. And so, talk about really wanting to surrender old wounding, old imprints, old traumas. And Chiron is just really wanting to bring in that healing energy with Uranus. Now, of course, there can be distortions with any archetype, especially in consensus state. What we can see going on is heavy re-imprinting of wounding and traumas. So the refugee crisis, as all the distortions of religious and fanatic wars are going on in the Middle East, the imprinting of earth events with climate change that could be taking place. The patriarchal distortions where you can pick up a gun and walk into a church and slaughter people in the U.S. I'm not saying there isn't imprinting going on, but there also is the greater intent to really bring about deeper healings and then to really come through with gifts. And especially, those in the greater world of astrology in general, not just evolutionary astrology, but the greater healing arts in general. This can speak to, some deep soul levels where we really want to have healings take place on planet Earth. I think I skipped over this. Did I skip over this one? Where did this one go? Hold on. I had a chart. I lost a chart. I literally lost a chart. My Chiron oppositions disappeared out of my chart. Isn't that interesting? I have it on my printout. Okay, so I will look for it in just a moment. Let me carry on, everybody. Sorry, I distracted myself. Chiron to Neptune, really not too much to speak about. I just put in the two conjunctions because Chiron is so close to new phase Neptune. It's not 30 degrees apart yet, and it's going to be several years before it is. And so in general, again, especially, it was 26 degrees, the conjunction. As I look back to that 2010 time period and all of last decade and this decade, as they were balsamic new phase Aquarius Pisces conjunctions, to me it was really the quantum physics really coming out there into consciousness and really recognizing that E equals mc squared. We don't destroy matter, we don't destroy energy, we change its form. We change the matter. And that's really bugging me. Chiron, my slide that I missed, my Chiron, Pluto, we've just come off of Chiron making these 5 waxing sextiles to Pluto in 2012, 2014. That was the apex of Jupiter making that yod to Pluto and Chiron. And so we won't have any aspects with Chiron to Pluto for a number of years yet. But it is waxing, so it is building in the ability of the soul to self-heal. And I looked at the last conjunction in Sag, the intent to rediscover, return to natural spiritual laws and principles, which is shamanism, Chiron word, that is taking place. Now, there was the yod. I just wanted to put that in there because it is within orb in May and June. So we're all looking at how we are adjusting our self-love and our ability to be creative as we're adjusting in the world. Inner adjustments, outer adjustments. Healing wounding around love and creativity. Making the adjustments to have our creative gifts accepted in the world. So, Chiron return. These are the dates that if you were born between April and August 64, these dates here, February, May 65, August 65 to March 1966, you can see here these are the dates that Chiron was traveling between 17 and 21.5 degrees Pisces. So these are the birth dates of people who will be experiencing Chiron returns. If you're right on these dates, you're going to have one return. If you're in the middle of these dates, right in here, you're going to have 3 Chiron returns. The Chiron return comes about 51 years. So if you are experiencing Chiron returns, everything we've been saying here, it is an important time period for healing and moving forward. Because again, Chiron has now made it one cycle around the chart. And in that one cycle around the chart, you've had opportunities to become aware of all of the different wounds and traumas within you. And so you've also had some opportunities to come about the healing of all that. And so if you do have natal Chiron in Pisces, and it's going to be very important that you're letting go of any of these Pisces Virgo distortion themes that we've talked about here over this last hour and a half. Now, I'm going to do something here. I lost a slide, and it is really bugging me that this slide disappeared. I accidentally deleted a slide. I can't, well, all right. I'm not going to take any more time, everybody. I accidentally deleted a slide. It's on my printout, so I don't know what I did between then and now, but it is gone. So, hold on just a second. Okay, now let's try this again. There we go. I didn't change any of these slides from last year. These are still the same slides. I am going to just put these up on the screen, and I'm going to allow you a few minutes to be able to just glance at this information. You're going to have the PDFs in order to be able to look at this. I don't know if I have the time to make it all the way around. And so what I'd like to do is just see if anybody has any questions for me in regards to anything on Chiron retrograde in Pisces, Chiron in general. And we're going to move around through these charts. The slide that I'm missing is all of these inner outer planets, including Jupiter, are having oppositions to Chiron. I had a slide on that, and I'm looking at the slide and it disappeared. So I'll recreate the slide for you, and it'll show up in the PDF where it was supposed to. And so again, as we've been going through this, any questions in general on Chiron in Pisces and the retrograde?
Kim?
Yes?
I'm going to open up the line for Peter, who has a question.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Kim.
Hi, Peter.
Just something came to me as you were talking today, and that's that the other day when the hailstorm started and you left the line on and you started to weep for several minutes. You wept and you wept and you wept, and it was so intense in a positive way. Don't get me wrong. You know, I'm one of those people, unfortunately, that since a little boy I wasn't allowed to cry. So when I have a difficult situation in my life, it's like my whole being wants to cry, but I can't. So sometimes I can spend weeks, months wanting to let go of something, and I can't because it's like my body is asking to let go of it by crying, and I can't cry. So these past few weeks, I've been going through something very intense. Kind of like this little boy in me wants to cry about things, and these little events that come up in my life, you know, it just bother me, but I can't cry. And then when I heard you crying, it's like, you know, I've spent many hours listening to you, but those 5 minutes that I heard you crying, it's like there was more power that you transmitted to me in those 5 minutes than in all of the tapes that I've heard of you, because you cried so purely. And then you let it go. So I think the significance of that class was that event.
Mm,
Am I
yeah.
making sense?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was right in the middle of it. I'm going, okay, instead of teaching class, I'm going to be living Chiron retrograde.
Exactly. I want to
Well,
thank you for that.
well, thank you for sharing that. And yeah, sometimes I get so triggered I don't know whether I'm on tape or not. Usually it's at the beginning of a class just trying to get, okay, something's not connecting. Leroy last week on segment 2 accidentally packed my headset. Here I am at the last minute in a meltdown. So I can go to the anger or the tears, but I'm so connected to nature. I'm so connected. My plants are my babies, and Leroy will tell you that. Mama Kim mothers the world. Mama Kim mothers, an acre and a half here. And it was just a very deep surrender. But what you reminded me of, Peter, is that I have this distinct memory. Again, lots of water in my chart, so crying isn't an issue for me. It's to hold it back and not cry. But I had this distinct memory of being somewhere. I want to say I was like 8 or 9 years old, and I can look back now, and when I cried, I probably just really triggered my mother. She's going to go off the deep end. How do I deal with this child? Leroy went through that when we first got in relationship together. Um, and so I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, and my mom was trying to do that patriarchal conditioning. Big girls don't cry. I mean, you must have got the big boys don't cry. Well,
Exactly.
I got the big girls don't cry, and my Scorpio went into a rage. I screamed back at my mother, I am going to cry if I want to because I feel better afterwards. And my mother looked at me and she just, she had this aha moment and she just says, okay, go ahead and cry. And she never again said that to me, but I don't, that was one of those significant memories that I remember from childhood of, you know, I feel better. I've got to release all these emotions. And, over the years, I've said, both men and women have tear ducts.
Some of them are dry, though.
Well, and that would be an interesting thing to kind of check into because I do run into the clients from time to time. There'll be a lot of fire and air in the chart, and they don't cry either. And sometimes, maybe it's not necessary, but maybe it's just for them to have a deep breath and feel the shuddering in the body, so to speak. To let it out. Because when trauma hits and we get wounded, the body can go catatonic, the body freezes up in shock, the body goes through different things. I mean, I went through all of that in the space of those few minutes. I went into this shock, and the pictures you see was when the storm first started, and I grabbed my camera. This is the 13 years. This is the worst I've ever seen hail for us. It's kind of like I grabbed my camera and was going around and taking pictures, and I was like, "You're in shock, Kim." And all of a sudden, I put the camera down. I was standing by the front door. And then I walked into the teaching room, and that's when I started losing it. And I'm going, I'm in no shape to teach class. I just, and I can't hold it back when it comes for me. So that was the Chiron and Pisces moment. And I guess I would say that if you can cry, cry. If you can let it out, let it out. Because as we know, dis-ease is crystallized emotions. It is
Yeah.
it is condensed mental patterns, so it
And
is.
you mentioned, and I think it's really important that I mean, the whole bit about Chiron as a ruler of Virgo, and I don't think it's a question of whether it's a ruler, but the co-rulership makes sense from the point of view of the sadomasochistic dynamic that's happening in our age. I think Virgo in other ages was a completely different expression of Virgo.
Exactly.
But in our age, Virgo-Pisces is so immersed in the sadomasochistic dynamic that, you know, all of our lives are impregnated with that, you know, energy. So it's especially significant when Chiron has been aspecting Uranus so intensely, because there's all that trauma.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's why I was pointing out, you know, in regards to, you know, Saturn, okay, having all of these oppositions here, and then Uranus having all of its oppositions here. I mean, that takes care of a lot of us born on planet Earth in the last 50 years. So there's a real strong Chironic effect to just really be aware of how wounded we are. And this is all coming at the ending of the Piscean age. You know, maybe it'll cycle around again in the Aquarian age. I don't have enough time to do long-term research on all of these aspects, but it's not hard to see that at this point over the last 50 years, there are a lot of us with these oppositions, you know, and oppositions are awareness, and they give us that energy of those opposing forces that it has to be conscious. You know, oppositions, we're bouncing back and forth till we recognize both sides and balance them. Well, bouncing back and forth is becoming conscious. So, yeah. Go ahead, Peter, and then Leroy.
No, go ahead, Leroy. There might be someone else asking a question.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment on that bouncing back and forth thing, because I've got that, obviously, that Chiron-Uranus opposition, and never completely understanding what it meant, but also being somewhat traumatized through this inability to express the emotions. And of course, that came through my parental upbringing, you know, with Mercury, Jupiter, and Virgo square the nodes. You know, a lot of criticism in the home and family life, and a lot of, you know, less permission to emote. And so, you know, this pattern in the terms of this this class on Chiron, it's a core wound for me. And so how I lived my life up until I met Kim and probably my son's mother, you know, couple decades ago was very unique. But then I started looking for these emotional women in my life, because it was exactly the opposite of who I was. And so I vicariously lived my emotional life sometimes through my wife, and you know, so I really resonated with what you said about, you know, hearing her cry. It's disturbing to me, but it's cleansing for me, because, you know, I've never given myself permission to do it in that way. And so that was an interesting comment, and I think it's appropriate to this class that a lot of us carry this core wound of big boys don't cry. And it's an important one to get in touch with and talk about.
Well, and it's a reflection of the deeper wound of the Piscean age, of the separation of spirit and flesh. You know, flesh including the emotional body, the body of the senses. And yeah. I never
really
thought
good
about
point, Kim, because
well, and you had a good point too, Leroy, because I'm very aware of that. Leroy's got Moon in Scorpio. You know, I thought, you know, that he would, well, I thought everybody had, I got a Moon in Scorpio. I thought all Moon in Scorpios could wail with the best of them, you know?
Well, and Venus and Cancer on the ascendant, but the truth is, because of the lack of permission in that some, whatever it was, whether it certainly wasn't a single event, but, you know, having brought us through that, it's just taken me in my second Saturn return to give myself permission to have those feelings and integrate that spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical sides, aspects of ourselves, in terms of really displaying and feeling those emotions and letting them go spontaneously, which is really what Peter's comment was all about.
And listening to Leroy, since we share that same situation, something like I got this intuitive hit, and it probably was when we were children. It was probably a shaming event. Yeah. A parent or someone, a figure of authority, in a moment of crying, when we were crying, probably shamed us. And that message got integrated for the rest of our lives unconsciously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So one last question, Kim. I as a budding astrologer, I resonate really well with Chiron. Ever since I started learning astrology, it just made sense to me. But none of the other smaller planets or asteroids really make sense to me. Only recently have I begun to resonate with Black Moon Lilith, for example. But Ceres and all the other ones, I don't know. I can read, I can intellectually try to understand them, but they don't make sense. What other asteroids do you really look at carefully in charts that you think are especially significant, like Chiron?
Well, because a lot of your astrological programs will draw up the, they call them the 5 main asteroids, and they lump Chiron in with Juno, Ceres, Pallas Athena, and Vesta. I think it's really just because those asteroids were kind of discovered first. Now that asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, there's about 200,000 asteroids. So because the software prints those out, I do work with those, and I won't always speak to them, but when I see them in a chart making conjunctions, squares, oppositions, stressful aspects, then I will use them. And in the world of evolutionary astrology, coming through the teachings of Jeffrey Wolf Green, Jeffrey has taught Lucifer a lot, and I really got in touch with Lucifer. So I followed Lucifer a lot, but I don't look at just the separating nature of Lucifer. I try to bring in the returning nature of Lucifer just as much. Now, having said that, I didn't speak up earlier today when I showed you Pope Francis' chart. Look at the asteroid Pallas Athena. Here it is natally at 19 degrees Sag. It's in opposition to Chiron. It's part of the nodal axis. Look at transiting Pallas Athena right here at 19 degrees Sag. The 4 asteroids that I spoke in between Mars and Jupiter, they have approximately 4 to 5 year cycles around the zodiac. Lucifer fits in there. And you can get a Lucifer ephemeride from astro.com if you want to. Astro.com if you want to. But Pallas Athena was the feminine warrior. And that's why I didn't speak up and say where I got it. But when I was talking earlier and I was looking at the nodal axis, the Pluto and Cancer and the gender change and some of that stuff. And then I saw that Pallas Athena and I'm like, okay, I'm going to see how Pope Francis goes through the rest of his time as the Pope, because there's something here about having the justice for women, Pallas in Sag, and the wounding of women, 6th house. There's something here where he's got to be standing up for women sooner or later. And that's what I looked at when I saw that statement coming through. So again, there are those that use Hygiena and a couple of the other ones. I mean, the most famous one, astrologer with asteroids is Demetra George. And we've had her lecture at astrology conferences before. Another one who looks at a fair amount of asteroids is Scott Wolfram, the astrologer, EA astrologer in Germany who does the astrocartography, astrolocality stuff. I'm familiar with Patricia Walsh. She likes to study Persephone, but she has a very strong Persephone in her chart. You know, if I had more time, I'd study some of those, especially those that are important to me, but my physical world just doesn't allow me to do as much as I want. Oh, another EA astrologer, Hanna Albertsen from Denmark, she got into the asteroids really early on and has lectured on them. I've got an old, for segment 1 students, I have an old lecture of her in the audio files lecturing on those asteroids. So over the years, yes, I've gone, and you see that I put in, you know, Juno and Pallas and Sirius and Chiron and Vesta in my charts. I do draw those in the charts.
That's why I asked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank
But
you.
I think in the evolutionary astrology world, we also put in Lucifer. I'm not familiar with how to add Lucifer into a chart. I'm not that technical. Again, the ephemerides at astro.com, but also in the evolutionary astrology world, it does seem that there are those that like Black Moon Lilith, and there's 3 different types of Black Moon Lilith. I'm not an expert in that area. And also Hygiena. Hygiena is the asteroid of health and wellness. And Persephone, if you're not familiar with that, you know, she was captured by Hades, Pluto, and taken to the underworld. And Ceres, the mothering and nurturing asteroid, had to make a deal with Pluto in order to get Persephone out of the underworld. And the deal was that Persephone would be above the underworld in the spring, summer, and she'd go into the underworld with Hades in the fall. So they agreed to share Persephone. And Persephone is kind of like the, and I'm not an expert, don't quote me, but my words I want to use, you know, she's the damsel in distress. She's the wounded feminine that doesn't have any power. And all of these 4 major asteroids, Pallas, Ceres, Vesta, and Juno, they're all known as feminine. Chiron is known as masculine. I don't really like attaching genders to any planetary archetypes, planets, moons, asteroids, because they exist in all 12 signs. They exist in both polarities. And males and females have, you know, the same asteroid and a sign in their charts. So I kind of shy away from gender specifics with the astrological archetypes. And so, good question. Let me check in and see anybody else on the board, Leroy, who may have a question in regards to Chiron.
Nope, good class.
Well, my Virgo mind is like, how did I lose that one slide? Because what I listed was Mercury in August, Sun in September, Mars, Venus, October, Jupiter, November, all make oppositions to Chiron while it's retrograde. And then Jupiter follows up with retrogrades throughout 2 more in 2016. So all that inner planet world, you know, Sun, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, or inner outer, I mean, just like Neptune from the Monday night class, the inner planets, Mars is traveling with the inner planets, Jupiter's traveling with the inner planets, so they're kind of ganging up on their oppositions to the outer planets of Chiron and Neptune in Pisces. So there's just a lot of emphasis on being able to get out of the Neptunian fogs and confusions and woundings and distortions and sadomasochism and all these planets, just like Peter said, I'm Pluto Virgo generation, or 2 degrees Pluto Virgo. And so early along the line in my EA studies, I'm like, I'm so tired of Virgo being beat up. And I just started putting an emphasis on what's good about Virgo, what's healthy about Virgo. They are the healers. They are so gentle and loving. You know, they're like me, going around and crying because my plant has a wounded leaf. You know, the bird broke its wing. You know, I can't see it. I can't see roadkill on the road without saying a prayer. And it's a prayer that I've been saying since I was about 5 or 6 years old, one of my first prayers. Lord, take care of the animal, please, and keep it safe with you. And Lord, take care of the bird, please, and keep it safe with you. Lord, take care of the deer, please, and keep it safe with you. Long time. So I think all that Virgo energy can be so grounding and compassionate, especially if we're consciously wanting to make an effort in that area. And so then we can do that with ourselves and really helping ourselves heal. And we can do that with recognizing that that energy comes from source. And all we have to do is desire it and request it to tap into it. And so that was the point that I was getting out of Monday's slide, and this one I just dropped with all these 5 planets making oppositions to Chiron. So I'll put that slide in the PDF, and when you look at the PDF, you can, I mean, it's all there one by one on the different planetary pair slides, but I had just recapped it for everybody. All right, last call for final questions, comments, or anything. And of course, here we got Venus going into Virgo to retrograde back into Leo, next month's classes, and we've got the Jupiter in Virgo. Stay tuned for that one coming up. And I've decided, because those planetary retrogrades come so much in the beginning of the year, my fall winter public teaching series is going to be on the chakras. Stay tuned for that one. And so, any final comments or questions? All right, everyone. Thank you for experiencing Chiron retrograde in Pisces with me. And I wish you all a great weekend and all of the support in the world for healing however you desire. Thank you. Adios.